Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hi, this is Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles. Thanks for listening. Every once in a while, if we're paying attention, the stars align and we find ourselves presented with an opportunity to use all of our being, our passions and skills and entire life experience to build something beautiful that transcends the limitations of our finite personality. My guest for this episode is Andrew Beckham of Beckham Estate Vineyards in Oregon. Andrew makes his wine in amphora. That in itself isn't unique these days, but what is unique is that Andrew makes the amphorae, which he calls Novum, and he is the only commercial amphora maker in North America. Chances are, if you're making wine in amphora in the US, Andrew made them. Yes, this episode is deeply helpful for anyone considering making any alcoholic beverage in amphora, or just wondering why anyone would use amphora. But it's also the story of a guy who found himself using all of himself to create a piece of culture that will truly live for generations. I hope you find Andrew's story as inspiring as I do. Enjoy. Andrew, welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really surprised. Well, not surprised because it's our mutual friend James Endicott has definitely talked you up, and he's mentioned a couple times, and then he just dropped a few bombs, little kernels of things that I'll just jump into by way of asking you introductory questions. But I was like, when I heard them, I was like, what? I definitely have to talk to these guys. But like, by way of just getting you to talk about yourself, I wanted to ask kind of a cheeky question and say, let's say I'm a winemaker, which I am, and I want to start using amphora in my winemaking, and I want to use locally, let's say North America, the entirety of North America made amphora. How many options do I have to get locally made in North America amphora?
As far as I know, one. At least one operation myself, Novum, that's making things at any sort of scale. I do
Yes,
believe that
that's
there
what I
are.
thought too.
Yeah, I do know there are potters who are trying to make large vessels to be used for fermentation purposes, but I don't know of anyone who's doing it commercially or quite at the same size and scale that I am here in Oregon.
Yeah, and I mean, can you talk about some of that size and scale? What are the vessels that you're making like,
Sure.
and what's your operation like?
Sure. Okay. So I make two different volumes. They are fired terracotta. They're not made with any kind of synthesized material. So it's earthenware that's fired to a very, very specific temperature. I
What
make
does
them.
terracotta mean? If I can interrupt you, I apologize.
Yeah,
What
terracotta
is terracotta?
it's a type of earthenware that typically has a high iron content and is very low temperature in its requirements for firing. And when
Okay.
the parameters are set correctly in the process, the vessel breathes just slightly, just enough so that the wine or the contents within can interact with the atmosphere beyond. Um, but they don't leak or weep, which is a real feat
Okay.
to accomplish to find this magic sweet spot. So I make them in two volumes. They're available at 320 liters and 460 liters. And just to give an idea for the scale, the large vessels are made with 950 pounds of wet clay, and they're just under 5 feet tall after they're fired.
Wow, that's amazing. And if I'm not mistaken, getting understanding how to fire these and make these was quite a process in terms of really dialing in the science behind it, right? The temperature and time that you take to fire them, I imagine the thickness and everything else that goes into that. You kind of had to figure that out through probably painful trial and error, I imagine.
Painful would be really an understatement. I think it's hard. Ceramics is tough. It's not an easy
Oh,
endeavor to be a part of. And we are shooting for maybe a 5% failure rate, but at times we can be at 100%. And especially when we're moving into a new scale or a new size of vessel or a new piece of equipment, for example, a new gas kiln, there's always a big learning curve involved. Um,
oh wow.
so the a few things that are quite unique about the process that I use to form these vessels, and then the technology piece. The way that I form them, I believe, is like no one else in the world. They're formed under rotational compression. So the vessels are being squeezed with 1,000 pounds of pressure as they're turning, which makes them seamless pots. And when they are finished, the geometry is absolutely consistent from one vessel to the next, and they have not been made with any joints or seams. Typically,
Wow.
potters making vessels like this for winemaking or brewing or distilling would be using a coil and paddle technique where there are cold joints every 6 or 8 or 10 inches.
Right. Wow. So it's just one giant piece of clay that's been shaped that way
That's
by spinning in pressure. So I've seen a video on your website where you are physically touching the spinning vessel, but that's you're not applying 1,000 pounds with your hands. So
No,
you
I'm
there's
not.
some
And so, the forming process is actually a proprietary method. So I
okay.
haven't really revealed
Okay, no,
how
that's
the
that's
vessels
fine.
are generated in any of those videos, but rather you're seeing me finish the surface and do the decorative band, kind of the dressing piece, or as a potter would say, the trimming of the vessel. Um, so
And
there's
it's
another step that happens before before that is
right.
guarded, that I don't put out there for public consumption.
Got it. Okay. That's really cool. I love that. Secrets are great. I mean, around techniques and things like that. That's that's the magic.
And
But
with the
a lot of what you're doing with those vessels, you've had to just figure out yourself anyway. I mean, a lot of it must be in a sense proprietary, right? I
yeah,
mean, if you're the only
yeah.
show in the continent, then there's not a lot of outside help you can reach out for.
No, and it's been a challenge at times because I really have developed the project entirely in a vacuum in my own bubble, which started with developing the right clay chemistry that had the right characteristics for the scope and scale of the vessels. But then, more
Right.
importantly, how the wines showed after a year of élevage in the containers. And the first version of clay that we were working with was a clay that was very easy to fire that came from the Sacramento Delta region in California.
Uh-huh.
And we found that clay had too much imprint on the wines. So we now use clay that comes from the southeast United States, well, the base material that's very high in silica and incredibly difficult to fire. But it has the right kind of neutrality that we're looking for in the containers, um, as we're trying to showcase our place and our site in the wines without external influence or things being added to the aromas or flavors of the wines.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I will definitely come back to that. Before I move from the craftsmanship behind the vessels, you're also sourcing. I mean, so there's a closure, there's steel closures on the top, and you're sourcing a lot of these materials other than going to the southeast of the U.S. to get your clay. Yeah, everything else sounds like it's within a stone's throw of where you live. Is that true? Even
That's
even the
true, yes,
labor,
and that's
former
actually
students, and
very important to me to keep things local and support local industry. So the two employees that work for me are both, well, one's a current Beaverton High School student. The other was a kid that I had in the year 2000, who's now almost 40, and he
okay.
works full time making the vessels with me. And the clay we have blended in Portland, just about 30 minutes from here, and the steel fabrication's all done in Newburgh, my hometown. The gaskets are made
Wow.
locally. I have a glass blower in Eugene who will make the Da Vinci glass fermentation locks. So I've really tried to make sure that this whole operation was based here in my local community.
That's
with,
amazing.
with the
Newburgh
exception of
is
some of
right.
the technology pieces. So I have a kiln
Okay.
that I fire in that is made in Amsterdam, and it is incredibly sophisticated and really is the key to our success with these vessels. We don't see more than a couple degrees Celsius variation from one area of the kiln to another, and we're able to fire the vessels with absolute precision. In fact, if we go just 3 or 4 degrees Celsius hotter than our magic sweet spot, the vessels become vitreous or glacious, and they're non-porous, like a demijohn or essentially like a steel tank. Or if we go just 2 or 3 degrees Celsius cooler than the sweet spot, they will leak and weep. So there's a lot of time and energy that goes into not only the firing process, time and temperature, but also checking levels of dissolved oxygen and levels of water saturation into the clay, levels of evaporative consequence. And we have very sophisticated methods to gather the data and then log and compile so that we have a data set that represents years of work, not just each individual vessel, but all of them cumulatively.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I mean, what you think? I mean, I don't know what I thought when I first started thinking about you making Amphora, but then like when I started hearing you talk about it, I was like, this is amazing. And I mean, the body of knowledge that you have really is unique. I mean, it's the expertise that you've gained is, I mean, proprietary doesn't really, you know, say enough. It's kind of a special kind of mastery, and I don't know. So I guess I'm not just trying to inflate your ego or anything, but I'm leading to the fact that I something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and this is a transitional question because we'll get into the wine now a bit, but wine is part of culture, and you know I've been thinking a lot about what that means, and agriculture is, you know, obviously culture is in the word, and viticulture the same thing, and it's like these the way that we do these things, the way that I've grown up thinking about them, and I think the way that most people think about in this country think about agriculture, for example, is very, it's more like an I don't even know how to put it. It's not related to culture is the best way I could say it. It's more about a thing that you do to with an end in mean. It's not, the end isn't in itself. And I feel like clearly you've made an incredible business out of the clay, and you are crafting things that are functionally useful, but there is this thing that you're also a potter as an artist, you and I feel like I would just love to hear you talk about that crossover, about the fact that you're kind of creating things that now literally are shaping the wine industry in this continent, and and as well as your own approach to wine, and as well as your own approach to aesthetics and art. And so anyway, if that gives you enough to talk on and
Oh my
chew on for
gosh.
a little bit.
I could fill the rest of our time together with that question.
Oh, I'd
Um,
love go, please
so,
go.
you
I'd
know,
love
a
to
few
hear it.
thoughts. You get my brain working here. So, um, I think that the product is very unique, and my position is very unique in that the potter is the winemaker, and the winemaker is the potter. And I think this really speaks to how informed both of these projects are by each other. And I think that that's a pretty unique position to be in, because when I trial something in the cellar and I see a consequence of what I've done in the studio, I can reflect on that, make changes in the studio with the way I'm forming the vessels or firing them or the materials I'm using, and then apply that to the winemaking the next year and learn from both of the operations. And so they're constantly feeding information to each other. And as an
Hmm.
artist, I've always been concerned with aesthetics. I've always been concerned with the way things look and read and feel. And so a lot of my time that I spend on these vessels is dealing with aesthetics and for me, a lot of things come back to proportion and ratio, the rule of thirds, the golden ratio, Fibonacci sequence, and this all kind of ties into our philosophy with farming. Um, and these containers have all of this amazing kinetic energy in them, and they really amplify what's happening in our vineyard and with our winemaking, um, because of these ratios and proportions and their aesthetic beauty. Um, they're functional, but they're also quite pretty. And so, I think that it's a fun place to be, where we can showcase our place with the vessels that we're using. And I know the wines that we're making here have a real sense of home and place, as they're made in containers that are made here on the site, and the fruit's grown here. And yeah, the aesthetics and the function are like totally, completely tied together.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about if somebody is interested in using amphora in their winemaking, what should they expect, and what does it do to the wine? Why do you use it? And and I'll ask more questions once you
Yeah,
get going with that.
of course, of course. So, for me, what I appreciate so much about these containers and the way they work with the style of wine we're making is their ability to get to the purity of place and site. And over the years, I've become less and less interested with the imprint or impact that we get from French oak barrels, for example. And having made wines in these containers since 2013, the consistent, remarkable characteristic to me is the purity that they offer. They do some things to the wine that are quite unique and quite special, um, but really they aren't providing any kind of external influence or flavor or anything that's being added to what we're trying to achieve. Um, the vessels, because they are earthen and they're
Mhm.
iron rich and are made of clay, offer a mouthfeel in the wines that are made in them that is quite unique and quite particular to terracotta. I liken it to putting your tongue on a wet river rock or a wet stone or a wet brick, perhaps. There's a dusty, chalky, mineral driven like feel to the mouth. There's a texture that
Mm.
comes from the clay that is quite uniquely the terracotta, but there isn't a flavor that's being added or imparted. And for us making wines that are sisters, both in clay and in French oak, it's so interesting how different the wines read being made in different containers. There's always a sweetness to the palate with the wines that are made in wood. In our case, it's all neutral wood, but we don't see that with the terracotta. What we see is just an expression of purity and interesting texture that comes from the clay, but not something that's masking or influencing the wine. And, from a
That-
technical standpoint, as a winemaker, these containers have some really interesting characteristics. Because they're clay, they have a negative ionic charge. And we see that when we age wines, when we go through élevage in these containers, the negative ionic charge is acting like bentonite would in a container as a fining agent. So it's a
must
step that we
ask.
don't
Okay.
need to execute in order to achieve wines that are quite clarified and stable. So that's a very unique characteristic to the clay.
Yeah.
Um, because they are rough on the inside surface, they will precipitate out a tremendous amount of tartrates, and the tartrates love growing on the insides of the walls of these vessels. Um, because they're porous and breathe, we find that microflora love living in the containers. And once we've introduced the bacteria we're looking for in our cellar, we have really, really healthy ferments. So here we're uninoculated. Just sulfur at bottle is the only thing we add to the wines. We often find that the wines go through malic as they're going through the alcoholic conversion, the primary conversion. Um, and then I
Right.
guess really interesting to me is what happens with the shape of the container. And these containers they're based on a ratio, on the golden ratio, and so they capture all of this kinetic energy inside of them. They have a pointed bottom and they're elongated and they have a tapered shoulder. So we see with ferments on the skins that we have a cap that is always being churned and pushed over and compressed down in and on it, in and on itself. So the vessels produce conditions that really limit volatility, as nothing's drying out and things are always churning and staying moist and wet. And it's almost like the vessel will do punch downs for you. We do usually go in and move things around by hand, but we're very gentle with that process. And then when we're
Wow.
fermenting juice in the containers, we'll see a kinetic action that will actually result in a vortex at mid fermentation. So certainly there's no need to go in and stir the lees. The lees are always in a state of turbidity and always suspended. And then when the ferment stops, the lees bed extends to the shoulder of the vessel. So we have this remarkably high percentage of lees to wine contact that we don't see in a barrel where everything
Oh,
settles to the bottom. Um,
right.
that's a very
Wild.
long-winded piece to your answer, but
No, I mean,
there's just so much stuff that's so unique about them and special. And then of course the
yeah.
sustainability piece, they're good for generations, not like a barrel that takes a generation to grow the tree and then is used for several years and discarded. And so for us, that's another piece that's quite important and ties into our farming. The fact that the
It,
vessels are
it,
made of the earth and they will last for
how,
generations.
that's what I was going to ask. Okay. Wow. That's very cool.
In the Black
So,
Sea region in Azerbaijan, Turkey, the Republic of Georgia, they're using vessels there that are hundreds of years old, and in fact, in some cases, quite old, as much as 1,000 years old. And in fact, I was just sent a photograph by a Georgian winemaker about a week and a half ago, where he had found a qvevri in a village that was built in 1909. And the vessel was, and he was so happy that he'd found this historic vessel and sent photos of the dating on the rim. And, they just are really remarkable containers for so many reasons.
hmm, that's cool. Well, it brings up I mean, all of those things are good data points to think about if you're going to be using these vessels in your own winemaking. But it also brings up some sort of red flags for me. And, if I was like things that I'd want to be careful about. So I wouldn't want to get bad microbes in there, essentially, because it sounds like, if you get the right microbes in, great. But if you got something bad in, it would be pretty tough to eradicate. Or is it not? Like how difficult is it to get something bad out of there, like if you an unwanted
Well,
microbe?
I mean, you'd be in the same position with any organic sort of container.
Yeah.
The one advantage to being the potter and winemaker is that here, or someone who's close to me, I have had people get really terrible VA, for example. Um, I mean, the brewers are looking for Brett, so they're working in the opposite direction. But it is actually
Right.
possible to put them in the kiln and heat them up to sterility, which is quite amazing because you can at that point reset the vessel to its
Oh,
original condition. However, the more
is
you fire, the more likely things are to break because of for stress and the potential for fracture when
gotcha.
things are heating and cooling. Um,
Gotcha.
they're really no different than working with any other sort of winemaking container, in that you need to
Okay.
be careful
Okay.
with your hygiene and your protocol. And here we are very diligent with the temperature in our cellar, the condition of the fruit when we bring it to the crush pad, our process and procedure with the winemaking. Um, we try to be very careful with our working conditions here to limit um, potential and liability with microbes we don't want.
Right.
And to full disclosure, we're a natural winery, and I think a lot of times people are afraid to talk about Brett and Pediococcus and other things that are really in anyone's cellar to some degree at some level. And having had some scorpion tests done last year, we discovered that we had some Brett population in our space that was not of a huge problem or consequence yet, but it was enough to get us concerned. And we have been quite careful to isolate those containers. And we use, in our case, a 350 degree Fahrenheit high pressure barrel washer and or steam to clean the vessels. Um,
So they're
so
pretty durable in terms of cleaning.
they're very durable. Yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah.
again, we've just here we've knocking on wood right now. We've had great success, but I think a lot of it is practice. How we manage the space and the containers.
Nice. Well, so couple questions. So if it's acting like a clay, like a bentonite fining clay, in to some degree, do you worry about color loss, or is that just a fact of life with clay, with that vessel?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So we can talk a little bit about some observational characteristics of the wines, and then tie that to some analytic observation also. So we often see that the wines we make in terracotta are a couple shades lighter in pigment. And for example, on our site we grow many varietals here, but Pinot Noir is a good example because we make it both in wood and in amphora. So we have fruit that's harvested at the same time, same parameters, really literally comes in at the same day in the same bins, and we split it and we make one of those wines in French oak and the other one in amphora. And we see in the wines coming from clay that we have a lighter pigment, there's a lighter hue. We also have wines that have less alcohol, and typically it's like 3/10 to a half point lower in alcohol, and that's due to some evaporation and wicking, I think, during primary, where we're losing some of those sugars
Interesting.
and potential alcohol. The
Hmm.
vessels are quite unique in that you can move from red to white to red to white with no pigment consequence or uptake. So we
Mm.
can age Malbec or Tannat in them for the wintertime and then make Riesling in them or Vermentino. And we don't have any pigment that's coming from the red wine that's been aged in the containers. In fact, a lot of times we think
Wow.
about using them like a cast iron pan or skillet that you build the seasoning over years. And so we have sets of vessels that we use for particular wines that have had many wines made in them, and then they've developed these particular seasoned characteristics based on what's been in them in the past. Now, one other thing that's of note and quite important making wine in amphora, we notice that the wines evolve at a faster rate. In fact, if we look at dissolved oxygen levels in the containers, we typically see somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3% more DO in the wines that are in amphora at a 1 year duration versus wood. So, for that reason, coupled with the sensory evaluation of the wines, we bottle our wines made in amphora at vintage or prior. In fact, our red wines typically go 9 or 10 months and then they go to bottle, where our wines made in French oak will go 14 to 16 months. And we, right now in our current tasting flight, have a couple of 2019 amphora wines that are really cohesive and together. They're homogenized and they're ready earlier on in their evolution. And because they've had a little more oxygen in the front end of their life, they're incredibly long lived in bottle. Um,
Got it.
so that's one thing that's quite different than other containers is um, how they become cohesive earlier on, how these wines are cohesive
Wow.
earlier on in their evolution.
They sort of get the impact of age right away, or much more rapidly, and then they're sort of stabilized at that point.
Exactly. They have more micro locks going on, and I think winemakers who are using these containers for the first time really need to be aware of that particular condition. Um, the other thing that's quite important with terracotta and um, vessels like this that are basic in nature is that they are treated with some kind of solution the first couple of years that they're used, so you don't shift the pH dramatically upward in the wines. So in our case, we
Mm.
fill them with like a 5% or 8% by volume tartaric solution, and we'll soak them up for 36 or 48 hours, and then move to the
Oh,
next
wow.
container.
Okay.
And that's to take the basic edge off of the container, so it's
Got it.
neutralized. And that needs to be done for the first couple times they're filled, and then after that they're good to just fill up.
Nice. So I'm wondering, would they be, because of the qualities that you've talked about, would they be good for treating something that maybe had harsh tannins? Like it sounds like it helps soften tannic impression, right?
Oh
You
man, that is
soften
actually a
tannins.
great question, and the answer is yes. In fact, we often use the analogy here of sea glass. And this is this is my assistant winemaker's analogy, so I got to give Phil Tarocco props here. But thinking about the way that a piece of glass would be very sharp and hard edged and angular when it goes into the ocean, and then over time it's abraded and washed and churned and moved, and it comes out soft. And we think a lot
Mm.
of times about what's happening in the containers, and especially related to tannins, with that movement and that washing and that churning, and ultimately the softening and rounding of all of those edges, coupled with
Wow.
the exposure to wheeze. And we do find that the tannins from the wines coming from clay are softer than they are in wood, and they're more tea like, very supple and soft, and not angular and abrasive. So there is a real
Mm.
definite quality in terms of tannin and finished tannin in the
And
wines that we
it
make in the amphora.
seems like time would also be your friend versus oak, where if the longer you leave it in oak, you actually might start pulling tannins out of the oak and become more tannic depending on the wine and the oak. But with the amphora, it sounds like the longer you go, the softer it could potentially be.
It can be, but
Is
again,
that
I think people need to be cognizant of the potential for the evolution of the wine to be accelerated. And
right?
again, we taste things after we get through month 6 and 7 with our red wines. We start to taste things more frequently, keeping an eye on the impact, um, what's happening with the tannins and what's happening with the microoxygenation.
Wow. So, well, let's talk about your wine then, and your let's step back and let's let's talk about the name of your winery and where you are.
Okay, perfect. So right now I'm sitting in our cellar, which is on top of Parrot Mountain in the Newburgh Sherwood area, which would be kind of um, the northern end of the Willamette Valley proper, where most of the grapes are growing in the middle part of the state. And we're at about
The
600.
Chehalem Mountains, right?
We're Chehalem Mountains AVA is
Yeah,
our AVA.
that's okay.
Yeah. So we're at about 680-foot elevation here, and we are on a very rocky site that is um, made with or composed of volcanic jori, the subtype
Mm,
being Salm. So it's very red soil that's on top of fractured basalt, and our soils are really shallow, maybe 18 to 20 inches, and we're into rock. And
oh wow.
because we have this exposure on top of Parrot Mountain, that is every direction. We have a west face, an east face, a south face, a north face. We're kind of on the crown of the hill. We have a lot of wind, incredible amount of wind, and a big diurnal shift from day to night. So this site tends to produce
Mm,
wines that have better natural acidity than maybe some people that are close to us but have different conditions. So we
gotcha.
started here with 8.5 acres. We now have 36 acres, and by the end of this month, we should have 20 of those planted. And
Wow.
we started with Pinot Noir, like everyone else in Oregon. And over
Probably
time,
easy to get.
we decided that we wanted to differentiate ourselves, and we will continue making Pinot Noir, but we've actually taken some out and put Riesling in. Um,
Oh,
we have just planted 3 acres of Gamay Noir to the north of us just last week, actually. We
great.
have what I believe is likely one of the bigger Trousseau Noir plantings in the US. We have 4 acres of Trousseau, and we vinified the Trousseau for the last couple vintages. And that is a wine that I'm incredibly proud of and excited to share with people because of the amount of time that's gone into the project. It took years to find the budwood and to get the vineyard established, and we're really thrilled to be making Trousseau Noir here. We have
How many
Sauvignon
acres of
Blanc,
that?
four
If I
acres.
if I can, 4 acres, because I have to say, your pride in that is deserving, not just for the amount of time and everything, but I think I was drinking a glass of that when I was with James, when I was like, I definitely have to call them because
Cool. Well, I'm glad you've
yeah,
had it then.
it's beautiful, and it reminds me of. It reminded me of what I love about a really good Norella Muscalese or Nebbiolo, where and sometimes Pinot, where you have this sort of translucent, light looking thing that has all this depth. Like the depth. I
Yeah.
mean, the appearance of it completely belies the depth that you get and the complexity that's in it. It's really, those are the special wines for me, and it was
Yeah,
definitely one of
yeah.
those
No, and
experiences.
it's interesting you mentioned that, and I liken it in a lot of ways to Nebbiolo for that particular reason. Also, it's very counterintuitive to make. There have been some producers who've made it in Oregon. We're not the only people who have it, but there aren't many. And some of the versions have been good, and some of them are just very extracted. And I
Mm,
think likely because those producers have made the Trousseau like they make Pinot Noir or Syrah or other reds. And it's such a tannic, thick skinned grape. We are typically only going 7 or 8 days into ferment before we press. And all of
okay.
that is based on tannin management. And so it's in our case, we are destimming 100% destimming the fruit, and then we're just going 7 or 8 days into primary and pressing off, and we're not punching down during that time. We're just moving the fruit around with our hands, so none of the berries are broken. We have to be so
Oh wow.
gentle to make sure that the wine isn't over extracted, and it's incredible how powerful it is for how light a color it has. It's quite
Yeah.
deceptive. Um,
And
so then
are you fermenting in the what do you call them? Amphora? What do you call your vessels? Because I know
I call them Novum, which means a new beginning in Latin.
Novum. Okay,
Yeah, new
great.
beginning. And I
So are you
when I
fermenting in those?
yes, yeah, we
Fermenting and aging.
ferment and age.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, this year we'll do 3,000 or 3,500 cases of wine, and all of it's made in clay. And only 300 or 400 cases will see any oak at all, which is part of our old brand that has been redesigned to fit more in with all the wines made in Amphora or Novum. Um, so yeah, about 3,000 cases purely in clay with no wood at all. I was going to also mention the other varietals we're growing.
Yeah, please, please.
Uh,
Yeah, sorry I interrupted.
no. So I mentioned Trousseau and Sauvignon Blanc. We have Aligote, and then we
Okay.
have some Italian stuff we're experimenting with. We have Nebbiolo and Schiapartino,
Yay.
both
Yay.
from northern Italy. We have Albana and Montuni. And I think in Italy, Montuni is very obscure. There's only 7 hectares, I believe. And it's really cool.
Yeah,
It's
how
very
did you get that?
phenolic, and we brought that here to make it on its skin. So we have those 4 Italian varietals. And then we've got this crazy Alsatian German white planting that's going in this later this month with 19 different
Uh,
whites. And I won't be able to get them all
Wonderful.
right now, but I'll name a few. So we have Auxerrois, Schwebe, Riesling, Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, Rulander, Sylvaner. Um, then there is we've got then it's kind of expanded beyond Alsatian varietals. We have Simeon Rose, Flora, which is a Gewurz Simeon cross, Gewürztraminer, Malone de Bourgogne,
Mm.
Mueller Thurgau, and I'm leaving like 7 or 8 more out.
Is
But
Kerner one of those?
we don't have Kerner. No, that is one we
Okay.
don't have. Oh, we Sauvignon from the Jura, the other
Oh,
the other
okay.
indigenous varietal. Well, the three, the white. Um, so we have Sauvignon. We're yeah. So I think unlike a lot of people in the Willamette Valley and in Oregon, we are trying to move away from Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and we're really trying to think about the warming climate and how we can grow varietals here without acidulation in the winemaking process that are in our house style. We think a lot
Right.
about farming for style, but at this point, it's become very difficult to make Pinot Noir without acidulation. We're doing everything we can on the farm to preserve natural acidity, including very limited leaf plucking and hanging more fruit, and the use of animals in our farming practice, sheep, and not tilling the soil, and but in hedging only once and really late. But these warm vintages, the only other thing we have left in our toolbox is to pick early. And in 2011, we made Pinot Noir the first week of November, and the last 4 vintages we've started harvesting in August. So that's why I'm looking
Wow.
at these other varietals. You know, Nebbiolo, for example, might be fantastic here in another couple years if we keep heading in this alarming trajectory.
Right. That is yeah, I know. I mean, I follow Oregon pretty closely. I mean, just it's a love of mine for a long time. But I'm curious. I mean, I've since you brought it up, I've heard such wonderful things about the 2017, 2018 vintages. But from your perspective, wonderful might not be the right description. Is that correct? Is that how? I mean, how would you describe those vintages?
No, I mean I love these vintages. I just for us to achieve our house style, we're working in a different with a different set of objectives than a lot of other people in Oregon. You know, we're not really
Well,
looking
and
at
that
we're not looking at bricks. We're looking at TA
right,
and pH. And so
right.
our picking decisions are based on totally different parameters. You know, we're not trying to get stuff ripe and then water it back and add acid and all the other stuff. We're
Right,
trying to get it right in the field.
right.
So
That that's
what's very
that's what I do
unique.
too, and that's what I was curious about. Like that, I guess that's what I was trying to say. Like, are they great vintages because they're warm? Again, is it still that association of just hot vintages with great vintages because you can get super extraction from big ripe fruit, or
Yeah,
is that what's still happening?
well, yeah, but I think our wines are really kind of outsiders. If you're looking
Right,
at
right, exactly. I mean,
and
I guess what I'm saying is like in the trades, they're being talked up as these great vintages. The reality is, if you're making in a natural style, they're just as difficult, if maybe not more difficult than any other vintage, because you might if you don't want to add acid, then you might have a problem because you're getting overly ripe. Is
right.
that true? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. It's absolutely true. And it's quite interesting for us. Well, it's not interesting, it's just the reality of things. When we look at our finished alcohol, for example, in our 17s, 18s, 19s, it's way less than everyone else's. Our 19s we just bottled, we don't have any Pinot Noir that's over 12. They're all in the 11s. And
Wow.
you look at our some of our neighbors. Got a couple people just across the ridge here, 15%, and it's been watered back.
Yeah.
It's just a style thing. For us, it's we're looking for finesse and beauty,
Yeah.
and I much prefer vintages that are cool and hang long, and it's we just have a different kind of
Yeah.
angle on things. So I'm fine
Yeah.
with low alcohol. I love acid. In fact, that's really our wines are all about acidity. And that's another interesting thing about the clay. Some of our wines are like our rosé of Pinot Noir from last year had a finished pH of 3. And because it's in the amphora, the texture that comes from the clay bridges that acidity on the palate, and it makes it feel
I
complete.
was gonna. That's what I was gonna say. I mean, honestly, I do. I want to give you a big compliment. I really think your wines are unique in Oregon. I've loved Oregon for a long time, and but I'm still a lot of the time there is this. I want to say like a two dimensionality, like it's lacking a sort of mid palate or a depth in the mid palate, and if yours didn't come across as acidic. I mean, I love that you're saying that you are driven by acid, but it's like I tasted more than just the Trousseau Noir, and these tasted very balanced and very round. I mean, plush even in some cases, and I
Mm.
mean not in a cloying way, but just in a really like it had that added dimension that I feel like is sometimes missing in Oregon. So
Hmm.
there's a big compliment.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank
But
you.
I, but that's great. The more that you talk about the amphora, I think there's like a real sort of some magic dust there, maybe that is happening with those,
Yeah,
with
and
the
there
Novum.
absolutely is. And I reflect a lot about, or think a lot about the history of man and wine and what vessels humans used. And, in the big picture, the last 7,500 years of man making wine in amphora, or man making wine rather, it was made in terracotta. It was made in earthen
Right.
vessels that were fired. And it's interesting. There was a gentleman here he visited us about a year ago, and he was a biochemist. And he made a comment to me that really threw me for a loop. We tasted the wines, and he told me that the wines had a medicinal quality to them. And of course, as a winemaker, I thought, oh God, like Band-Aid, like Brett or something.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so I asked him. I said, "Well, what do you mean by medicinal?" And he said that the human body needs iron. It's one of the minerals
Uh,
that the human body needs to be healthy, and that there's a reason that man has used clay and particularly terracotta for so long, and it can't just be chance that humans settled
Interesting.
on this particular type of clay to carry their water in, and then move their food and grains and make beverages in. And that was really an interesting observation to me, that there are probably
Mm.
some like deeper and more profound values and rationale behind mankind and terracotta. It's I tell my kids I teach
Yeah.
high school ceramics, and this is actually my last run. I'm going to be done in June. But I always talk to them about how humans sustained themselves before we had Tupperware and stainless steel. It was Ziploc bags, it was clay pots. that's how
Right.
that's how people lived and made a
Yeah.
living.
Yeah. It's funny because it's all. I mean, iron is the essential, I guess, mineral in red blood cells, and you get anemic, and so there's some like lifeblood thing that I think we could get from that as well, like that earth. I trip out on that because it's related to the meaning behind my name. The Hebrew meaning behind my name is tied to red earth and things like that. So I
Wow.
love
Huh.
that. Yeah, it also is tied to mortality, and it's that's part of the whole thing that you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is great. So are you saying you're not going to be, so just let's make that clear, you are a high school teacher as well as all of this other stuff that you're doing, and is this your last year teaching? Has everything caught up to you too much and it's time to stop teaching, or is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. I am too
Okay,
busy.
yeah.
I'm too
Yeah.
busy now. This last year I've really been selling a lot of these containers to brewers and distillers and cider makers. So it's beyond the wine world, and I've been shipping
Wow.
them internationally now. And I mean, they've gone to New Zealand and
Wow.
Mexico and Canada, and but it's multifaceted. I've been teaching for 21 years. I've been in the same classroom at the same school for 21 years. It was the first teaching job that I got. And I've touched about 7,000 kids based on my calculations. And a lot of them, not many, but some of them are potters now and will be for the rest of their lives. So I know I've made a difference, I've made an impact. But this last year, teaching ceramics, which is a very experiential thing to learn and often needs to be learned in collaboration with other people, to have success together and to fail together and to see someone get it and then pass that nugget on to the next person. All of that has been lost with trying to teach ceramics on Zoom. And
Yeah.
it's been quite disheartening. And I went 2 weeks without a single kid talking to me, turning their camera on, or putting something in the chat. And as a
Wow.
teacher I know I've been effective. I know I've been able to pull kids into the world of Beaverton High School and find success there. That piece is just missing, and I can't do it anymore. I need to focus on my family and the winery and vineyard and the Novum ceramic business, but I'm mentally just done. I'm spent after this year, and we went back to
Ugh.
teaching hybrid on Thursday. So today was my second day back with kids, and it is nicer to have faces, but the faces are covered up, and there are only a few of them there, and
Yeah.
it's just not the same. It's like a totally somber situation. I've never seen a high school where no one talks. It's just silent in the halls, silent in the classrooms.
What?
Well, I know all of
Yeah.
us when we were all in high school, it was rowdy, right?
Right. Yeah. 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 No,
So
it's
it's
getting
just
them to
time
shut
for
up was
me.
the problem.
Yeah, I know. It's time for me to exit. While
Mm.
things are still positive enough, I can leave feeling content enough, I guess.
Yeah, that's a well, that's a good long stint. I mean, uh, why did you? I mean, did teaching happen because you were an artist and it's hard to make a living as an artist just selling your art, or was it a love that you also enjoyed sharing and wanted to teach? Was teaching as much a passion as the art was,
Yeah, man,
or did it become that?
it's my whole life has been a series of very fortuitous circumstances that have led from one thing to the next to another to a new chapter, and I've always tried to be one to take advantage of the opportunity when it presents itself. So, in high school, I was a kid who was a lost soul. I was academically quite capable, but didn't give a crap. And when
Mm,
I was in high school, I skipped school all the time, and I really the only reason I went was to be a part of the ceramics studio and the ceramics classes I had with old man Lortz. And I loved pottery. As a freshman, I that's why I went to school, and I played the drums in the marching band. I was a kid who needed to use my hands, and
yeah.
that was it. That was my hook. And I went to college and majored in history, but I kept taking ceramics classes the whole time, and then I just needed a semester to do a double major, and so I did that, and then I moved to Park City, Utah, with two useless majors in ceramics and history, and I was a ski bum for about 5 years. And it was there in Park City that I found a little art gallery at the bottom of Main Street, and they had a studio in the basement. And I got a membership and started making pots and started selling them in the gallery store. And then the man who taught the ceramics classes quit, and I went upstairs and I said, I can do this. I was a ceramics major in college. I can teach these classes. And I started teaching the classes there and wanted to get more serious about my life, earned my master's degree, and started teaching ceramics at the local high school. And along the way, we wanted to move to the country to build a pottery shop in the woods. And we found this property that was in a sea of timber and moved here to build a pottery shop and got sidetracked, and I started cutting down trees and planting wine grapes and pulling stumps and propagating vines. And then I grew grapes for 10 years without making any artwork. And in 2013, my wife showed me an article on Foradori and her Amphora and the Dolomites. And I thought, oh my God, I can make those. That's what I've been doing my whole life, making big pots, but I never knew why. And so it all, the whole thing ties together. And I guess the teaching piece for me, it's what I love to do. And I needed that so much when I was in school. And to be able to offer that to other young people
Mm.
has been really rewarding for me. And like I said, I know I've turned people onto it who are lifetime potters and passionate about the arts. And um, not all of them, but enough that it's been a pretty cool career. It's just time for the next chapter.
Well, it sounds like Andrea is a pretty intuitive and insightful person as well, to have sort of pushed you in a gently in a direction that inspired you and awakened you to a whole new life too. Um,
She knows me so well.
she
She
was.
knows she knows all she's got to do is plant the seed and then make it feel like it's my idea, and then I'm hell bent on it. She knows how to work it. She gets me thinking about it, and then she makes me feel like it's my idea, and then boom, we're rolling. And it is true. My wife
Genius.
she's an equal partner in this business and operation, and is key to really all of our success. Without someone to market and sell and organize the wine club and run the tasting room, and we would just be making wine and have a pile of product here. So yeah, she does a fantastic job.
Well, and people can come taste, right? If they want to come, you have a tasting room, and you guys are back open now in Oregon.
They've just kind of restricted things again, but
Oh,
we're still open right now. In Oregon, we can't have groups of larger than 6 people, and they're not all supposed to
okay.
be from the same. Or they're supposed to be from different households, and not commingled. But yeah, we're by appointment only. We do have a tasting room here. It's really an incredibly cool place to visit because you can taste the wines. We do a lot of the tastings in the cellar where you can see the pots and touch the vessels and smell the aromas in the cellar with the clay and the wines fermenting and aging. And then we've also got the studio here, which we like to share with people if they're interested. So you can get a real sense of the place and the people that are a part of the project when you visit us. And we try to spend a lot of time educating people that come here to taste. Not that everyone needs a lot of information thrown at them, but tasting wines from Amphora from Novum is a very different experience, and I think it requires explanation for people to really understand the concept of the project and to understand why it's unique and important. So our tastings are a little longer than some and full of a lot of information that's very valuable.
Yeah, I love that. I'm getting that sense right now. I love it.
Yeah, and when you come here
I
to taste, you typically taste with our assistant winemaker or my wife, and then I do the studio piece. Um, so they're more like polished professionals than myself with dealing with people in the hospitality piece. I'm a little rough around the edges.
Oh, that's no. I think you seem smooth. You seem pretty smooth. Um, so you went from 8 acres to 30 some acres. What is that land like, and what are you doing with? How are you caring for it? I heard you mention animals and no till. What's going on?
Yeah, okay. So we've been organic here since 2013, and we do use biodynamic principles in our winemaking, and with our farming we do apply 500 and 501, and we think a lot about the calendar, and especially with some of our wines that are really long macerations. We do a Pinot Gris that is 1 year on the skins, and often we
Wow.
see these cycles of development of particularly tannins, where we'll build astringency and the wine will be very bitter, and then it'll fall out and the tannins will polymerize and things will homogenize, and we come to a point where the wine is really beautiful, and then it'll go away again in another loop, and it'll start to become astringent and tannin and bitter, and we got to ride it out. And often those cyclical movements, from an observational standpoint, are tied to the calendar, to the biodynamic calendar. So we do use animals in our farming practice. We have a flock of baby doll sheep that we graze through the vineyard. We have beehives and chickens that are free range, that seem to shit all over everywhere. We don't want them to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. We've got those. Yeah.
We have set aside about 8 acres as a riparian zone, that's not
Okay.
fenced, that is just purely native habitat, and that's really important for
No.
us to preserve the some of the natural habitat here for animals. We've signed the Willamette Valley Oak Accord, so the oak trees that we have on our property are registered, and at least under our stewardship or ownership, they will never be cut down. In fact, we've signed a legal pact to make sure that they're preserved. No till, with the exception, full disclosure here, we did till every other row this year. It's been 7 years because we have a massive explosion of rodents in the vineyard,
Yeah.
and the
I've
field
heard
mice
that.
are like out of control, and so we're trying to knock part of their habitat back. Um,
Yeah.
so we tilled really early on. It's been about 8 weeks, and it's already reseeded and regrowing with a native seed. But that's not something we typically do. So we really are trying to make sure we're preserving and enhancing the property. Regenerative agriculture is really what we're trying to achieve, and no irrigation. So all of the vines that we're planting this year, and all of the vines we've ever planted, they've never been irrigated. So we're not, drawing water table down, and um, a lot of these
So
things
even
also
even
get back to winemaking style. So,
do you have to
excuse me.
water them to establish them, or
We
is or
do.
or okay, but
We do,
then you can
yes, but
stop.
we don't run irrigation line. We hand water
Got it.
typically 4 or 5 times the first year the vines are growing, and that's usually substantial enough. That gets them
Right,
through.
with everything else. Got
Yeah,
it. That's great.
it's amazing to come here and see this site in August or the beginning of September when we haven't had rain in forever. It's lush and green, and the vines will find water. They'll go until they find a source. Um, So it's, yeah, all dry farmed. I will mention this too, since I hit on the end of the last year. Like many other producers in Oregon, we were dramatically affected by the wildfires here, and I'm afraid that what's
Yeah.
been quite common in California is soon to be a reality here consistently. For us, we made no red wine. Well, I take that back. We made one lot of red wine, our Trousseau Noir, that we were so fortunate to harvest the day that the wildfires started because they were young vines. But all of the other
Mm.
wines were so affected by smoke that they were disposed of. So we went from
Uh,
3,000 cases to only 300. Um,
what heartbreak.
yeah, it's really tough. And on our small scale, we didn't have crop insurance, and it's expensive. All of the hand labor to do this organic farming, to stay on top of everything. It was just really, hard to swallow and heartbreaking to have, no product for the year. Um,
Oh, man. I mean,
so
I don't mean to make light of this in any way, but I guess I guess just to highlight some other people how difficult it must be. You have the fortune of having this other venture, in terms of the Novum
yes.
production. Did that, and I can't imagine, like, if you're trying to be a farmer and that's your main thing. Like, I mean, that's like a career ender. That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, and then couple that with COVID, you know.
Yeah.
So we're super fortunate in that our model has been direct to consumer sales. So we do have some distribution. You know, James does a fantastic job in the markets that he represents us in New York and in California. Um, and we do have some distribution in Tokyo and Ontario and Vancouver, BC, Quebec, Chicago, and some other cities nationwide, and a little bit more overseas. But really, our model has been DTC, and we have a large wine club, so we were not very affected by on-premise sales, and how a lot of wineries who are more dependent on distribution really had a challenging year
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
on-premise sales were so down. So yeah, I'm fortunate that I've got this other business, that we had this other kind of sales model, um, and we tried to take this opportunity to focus on what we could focus on rather than dwell on what we couldn't fix. So we spent a lot of energy upgrading our winery space. We did a tongue and groove ceiling, and finally sheetrocked and painted and put glass roll up doors in, and got new windows, and tried to work on our hospitality piece. So when people come here, they have as nice of experiences as we can possibly offer.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, hopefully that will be soon. Hopefully, I'm gonna be there soon. Hopefully. Well, this is great. I mean, I think there's a ton that we could talk about, but in interest of time, what let's I don't know that we've said what is the name of your winery?
Oh man, yeah,
I
right.
did.
That's pretty funny. We left all of that out. So the name of the winery is Beckham Estate Vineyard, um, and we have two brands that are part of our label. We have 80 Beckham, which is those are my initials, Andrew Dow Beckham, and those are wines that we make with sourced or purchased fruit. And then we have the
Okay.
Beckham Estate label, which this year we've redesigned the two labels so that they look the same. There's an amphora on both of the labels, as all of the wines are made in amphora now, or Novum. Um, so Beckham Estate Vineyard, you can get us at Novum Ceramics on Instagram, at Beckham Estate Vineyard on Instagram, or you could dig us up on the internet. Um, and yeah, we're always willing and happy to host people to visit. And like I did mention, we are by appointment only, but we're open most of the week, so we can accommodate people if they're interested in visiting.
Oh, that's great. Well, Andrew, thank you so much. I mean, it's a really special thing that you've got going there, and I mean, I hope everybody has come to realize that who's listening to this, and it's really great to talk to you about it. It's a whole culture that you're building, and it's really beautiful. So
Wow.
thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and any winemakers who are listening in to the conversation are encouraged to give me a shout, and I'm happy to talk about what I know and have seen, and I'm also happy to get people in touch with others who have used my vessels, and um, yeah, I'm eager to get them more out of my own orbit here in Oregon. I want to continue moving them out of my immediate domain for various reasons. But yeah, I love talking about making wine and clay and making vessels, and um, yeah, anyone who'd like to have a further conversation is welcome to reach out.
That's great. All right. Is there a way that they should reach out to you? Just through the website?
Yeah, the website will link to me or Andrew at novumceramics.com. And my
Okay.
Novum Ceramics website should be up sometime next week. It's one of those things where I've been so busy, and I've everything is just growing organically, and I started to realize that there were people who are trying to reach me who can't get a hold of me. So we made a website. Well, I didn't. I had someone make it, which we should have done 3 years ago. But you know,
Yeah, I do.
play hard to get, I guess. And I guess here is one last thought. If anyone is interested in using one of these vessels, they do take about 3 months for me to produce. So I'm kind of getting close to the tail end of what I would be able to produce to accommodate for vintage 2021.
Got it.
Yeah, but not impossible yet. We're just starting to run up against the end of the
The
operational window.
prices are just getting higher.
Well, you know what, right? Yeah. If you need one late, the price is higher. That's a good. That's good. I like it.
Well, cool. I'll just end by saying thank you so much. This has been really wonderful, and I really enjoyed getting to know you and what you're doing better, and learning about these vessels, and definitely see a place for them in the future in my winemaking. So I'm excited. It's really cool.
Well, thank
Really
you,
cool
Adam.
stuff.
Yeah, it was really fun to talk, and thanks for reaching out.
Here's my final question for you. How, when you are starting class with a brand new slate of students for the past 20 years, how do you get their attention and get them engaged from the beginning? Like, did you have any tricks or techniques, or did you have a shtick, or did you just jump right in and
No, I do have
give
a
them something to
shtick.
do with their hands? Okay,
It's
what do
so
you do?
important, man. The hook. If you don't get the hook sunk into them in the first 10 minutes, you're toast. It can
Got it.
ruin the whole school year. It's all about the first, especially the first class period. So,
Yep.
and this is where it's been so hard with Zoom. So my typical MO is to use humor. And,
Okay.
you know, I do a lot of like demonstration where it looks just like magic to watch someone who's a professional potter make something. You know, it's mesmerizing. And then I'll have the kids
Right.
try in front of each other and they'll fail. And I've done it long enough. I'm able to field like 99% of the situations and make them funny. And so that's the way I hook them. I hook them by showing off a little bit, you know, making sure
Yeah.
they understand who the expert is.
Right.
And that it sometimes includes showing them little bits of stuff off the internet or videos, or but it's more me demonstrating, and then humor. And unfortunately, as I've got older, the other connection piece has been lost. But when I was a younger teacher, it was music, because so often, you know, the kids, they're so into music. And when I was in my early 20s, I listened to the same music as they did. And now,
Right.
not so much. Now everything is abrasive to me except West Coast Bay Area gangster rap and jazz. So, like, I'm very particular about the genres I enjoy. So that doesn't work so well. I play the jazz channel, and it's, you know, to them it sounds like elevator music. So yeah, humor and expertise, I think, are the ways that I get them hooked.
Got it.
But man, the tone.
Did you have any jokes?
Yeah, I've got like the typical kind of dad jokes,
Okay.
you know, that are funny still. But you know, if you have with high school kids, if you have a bad first class session, you may not recover from that for the whole semester.
Right.
It's just the vibe is determined at the beginning.